Hello everyone, welcome back to Gelvin Valley for Farming Simulator 15. We're still enjoying the map. Wes, who's the one who graded this masterpiece for Farm Sim 13 first and then 15. Well, we are on the largest field that we have and trying to make some headway in our fall cultivation, trying to get our fields ready to replant. So I'm kind of enjoying the views, the sky. Oh hey, there's a plane coming overhead. Don't get to see that too often. I mean, we do, but maybe I need to add some sound to it so it makes it sound like he's dive bombing us or something. Okay, just got a little dab to do here on top, and then we'll be heading down the field on the other side. Actually, before I go too much further, let me just check on my sheep. Okay, 35,000. Alright, we still got plenty of food. Just want to make sure our sheeps have plenty to eat. Well, I kind of had a topic for today's video kind of ready-made by a gathering I was at here the other day. I'm kind of curious as to what everybody's thoughts and comments would be when I described it. It was a holiday gathering, basically for New Year's. And that's all really say about it as to the who's and whatever to protect the innocent parties and all that hocus pocus. But have you ever run into somebody, and I don't know if this is a personality type or, you know, let's be honest, if it's just a jerk, but it's the type of person who will say something insulting and then turn right around, like if you get offended or if you get offended or if there's hurt over it, they immediately say, well, I was just joking, or they gaslight you as to how you shouldn't be offended, or they tell someone else that you were offended. It's never cast, you know, that this person never says, for example, I offended so-and-so and that's why they're hurt. Oh no, you know, it's never said that way, but they may say so-and-so is offended and, you know, don't know why, you know, basically presenting it as if it's someone else's problem. Now, I don't know what you call this kind of person, but I just had it done to me, and I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to react to a person like that, or not. I'll maybe describe kind of what happened, and I'll say how I reacted, and yeah, I will maybe just go from there. So it was at a gathering, and I happened at the oh shoot, I'm going the wrong direction. Get back in line. I was sitting on a chair and kind of bent over on the chair, looking at the ground, because on a blanket next to my chair was my granddaughter. That's right, everybody. I'm a grandpa. And she's just the cutest little thing. And so I was sitting there talking to her. She was looking up at me. You know, we were making faces at each other. She's very little. She's about 3.5 months old, and you know, just it's our first grandchild, and we just love her to pieces, and my wife and I, and it's amazing how something so little, that someone you've never met before can just so captivate, your heart. Uh, Nothing quite like having a child, a grandchild in this case. But anyway, that's what I was doing. I'd been sitting there probably for, I don't know, 20 minutes. Then we were just talking to each other and that kind of thing. And anyway, this other person comes up and he comments something to the effect, oh, I wish I could remember the exact words. Don't want to misquote him, but you know what? I'll get close enough. He asked, oh, are you talking to one of your turds? Or something like that. And you'd have to know the person. I mean, this isn't the first time, a comment like this is dropped. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not above having fun or playful nicknames. Matter of fact, I think we've talked about that, subject or whatever in videos before. And I know, like, for our kids, at some point along the way, my wife didn't do this, I did this. And it has to do with a tape that I once heard, a tape of stories by some other author, a humorist, where kids were referred to as grubs. And it was in reference to a group of kids who were in Cub Scouts, and someone took them where they weren't supposed to be, and he really didn't know what they were, and he kept referring to them as grubs. And anyhow, I'm the type of person, when I hear something like that tickles my funny bone, I tend to latch onto it and just kind of use it on my own kids or whatever. So, but my daughter, I remember growing up, she for a while, she knew it was intended as a term of endearment, but she said, hey, grubs are these filthy little worms that eat poop. It's like, oh, okay, well, even now, the funny thing is she has basically adopted the term grubs, just fine. But it's kind of like how when someone inside a family says something, it's taken a little different than those outside of the family saying it. I don't know what you'd call that. Maybe we call that hypocrisy at one level, or inconsistency. But anyway, I guess I say that just to admit, my own. I'm not averse to having fun with nicknames and all that. But, as I sat there looking at my sweet little granddaughter having someone come up next to me and immediately called her a turd out of the gate, that kind of hit me wrong, if I gotta be honest. And, trying to figure out what to say, I think I looked up at him and I said, you're calling her a turd? Or something to that effect. And, then he went on to say, well, and by the way, this is a person that has no kids. I don't think he and his wife were ever able to have them. He kind of has a medical condition that may have something to do with that. But anyway, they have no children, but he went on, he said, well, if I had kids, I'd be calling them turds all the time. This kind of thing. And I'm sure he's telling the truth. He probably would. And I can't remember exactly. And he says, well, I think he said then, well, don't you call them turds? And I think I said, well, no. And he says, well, then what should I call them? As if to suggest that there's anything other than turds, to call them a child or whatever. And I said, well, I think what I mumbled out was just, I guess you're going to call them whatever you're going to call them. Kind of a totally I don't know what kind of an answer you call that. Just a non-committal saying of something because I didn't know what else to say. So I think he realized he laid an egg, if you will. So he kind of went off to the side, disappeared. I heard him comment to someone else, kind of like I was just saying a little bit ago, he said my name. He's offended now over, I don't even know if he said he's offended, and he was saying this to someone else, and I didn't even react. I mean, I didn't yell at him. I didn't shoot him out. All I did was just ask a couple questions, gave a non-committal response. But it's interesting. I think sometimes people who act this way are very perceptive in their own way. What they never understand is how much of a jerk they can appear to be in the eyes of other people. That is something they're oblivious to. But when they are held accountable, or if it is suggested through behavior or otherwise that maybe something they did was wrong, well, they're somehow able to detect when someone else is upset at them. And like I say, I didn't, kick and scream. I didn't cuss him out. We didn't hardly say anything to each other after that, or in the process of it. And I just, there's a person always has a choice. I need to keep relearning this in life. A person always has a choice of whether to be offended or not. And I think my son has a book called Unoffendable, where someone has literally written on the subject on how to not take offense over basically anything. And it's the whole world in which we live seems to be saturated in people who are constantly offended, and offended usually over the dumbest of things. And I'm not trying to be on my high horse here. It's kind of like a comment that I heard. It didn't hurt my little granddaughter. She's too little to understand much of anything. She didn't know what she was called. He was obviously saying something to give me a jab. But, is it my right, or is it wise? Maybe is a better question. Maybe a person has the right to be offended, but is it a good idea to be so? Because what ends up happening is, when you're offended, is relationships break. You spend inordinate amounts of time thinking ill of someone else and just wasting energy on negativity. So I've long learned this is a dynamic in life, and I'm trying to learn how to better roll with punches. Obviously our knee-jerk is well, if someone insults me in some way, doesn't show respect, says something about my mother, oh my goodness, and you see people who get in trouble because of this, and some little things said, and where someone maybe amped them up, and it doesn't make it right, the person who caused the offense. But by the same token, especially when it is only words, carelessly uttered, and someone isn't literally dying, is it productive to take offense or that kind of thing? And I don't think that it is. So, but the question that I have is, what do you do with someone like this who communicates maybe in a way that isn't appreciated, or maybe not even realizing how hard it is to take someone like him serious ever. When these kinds of comments are made, the old adage, well, consider the source, meaning see who is saying it, and if it is an unrespected person or whatever, or a kid, well, who cares what they say? Nobody cares what they say anyhow. There's that too, but that's kind of dismissive in its own right. But I don't know, it's kind of like they always say, you never know why a person maybe behaves or acts in the way they do, until you've walked a mile in their shoes, or maybe have an understanding of where they've been. And for this particular individual, I don't know a lot of, his past, his background. It's a type of, doing this, I would say, is a type of bullying. And what makes a bully? Is it because someone was a bully to them, once upon a time? Well, maybe that's a little bit. That seems like it would make sense. Was it growing up in a home where this was how communication happened? I do know this particular individual, he grew up in a broken home. His parents divorced. Don't know how old he was when they did. So, and I really don't know his mom or his dad. Maybe this is how they communicated with him. To make some caustic remark, that sounds funny maybe to him or to someone, and just to drop it and see what happens. There's a type of person out there that sometimes treats people like they're like a plaything, like they exist just for them to do something, to get a reaction, have a laugh, but that's all that person is to them. And in this case here, I don't know. This admittedly is kind of how this person is, where you would say big mouth and basically open mouth, insert foot, except the person sticking their foot in their mouth never really perceives just how they're doing that. It's an amazing dichotomy how they can have such a lack of perception of their own issue, if you will, or how people perceive them as a not nice person, or as a joke, or as an idiot. And believe me, this particular individual, I've heard a lot of people say things about him before. I've even defended him, in many instances, because he's also an easy target because of these tendencies, to open mouth and insert foot. But anyway, I just had this rolling around in my head, and later on in the evening at the gathering or whatever, we reconnected. Nothing was said about it. I think this type of person also has a very hard time apologizing. Because if you can't see in yourself that you've done something wrong, or harm someone, you don't know how to apologize. And, it'd be easy to pass some of this off as, someone just being an unregenerate jerk, or just unwilling to have a little humility and realize that it's possible for them to also do something wrong. I really think there is a type of person that can't see it, and then there's others of us that maybe see things on ourselves, and we get self-absorbed the other way because we're only looking at ourselves and not necessarily seeing others. So, oh, there's so many ways in life to screw things up, aren't there? But anyway, I'm curious if anyone here has ever encountered such a person. How, if you and the thing of it is, for me, I don't have to be around this person very often, but periodically I do. There is a connection. But what would you do? Is this someone you have to kick in the shins? Do you fight back? Um, it's, like some people will say, well, I didn't start the fight, but I'm going to finish it, And it's so tempting, it's just inner human nature when someone does something against us, insult or whatever, we want to, that innate sense of justice or whatever it is in the human spirit, wants to correct the thing and correct the other person. And if if we're taking a shelling, we want to send some shells back, or our own pounding. So anyway, I'm curious on your thoughts. But the other thing it made me think of, even as he was doing this, I have a deep appreciation for the Bible, which is part of my Christian faith, and have spent a lot of time reading it, and multiple times. And there's, after you read it a number of times and try to read it often, to have just it starts to take residence in your mind. And so maybe that's kind of why this came to mind. But there was a verse that I remembered, and I couldn't quite quote it, but it was someone who causes harm, and then says, oh, I was only joking. And the Bible has a book in it called Proverbs. It was written by Solomon, most of it, and commonly considered one of the wisest, maybe the wisest men that have ever lived. And he's a whole series of episodes in his own right, if we really wanted to talk about that. But anyway, he wrote the Proverbs, and it's full of these sayings, if you will, that you can kind of look at it, and on the one hand say, it's like, well, that is stating the obvious. But on the other hand, you could say it is hard sometimes to state the obvious in the form of a principle. Where it'll say, if you do this, here's the result. And I think why it resonates so much or seems obvious is because, after a person's lived a little bit of life, and you look at this book and you see those principles, it's like, oh man, I've ran into that so many times. It just makes sense. Anyway, there was a proverb that he had written, and it came to mind. It had something like to do, it was the guy that's only joking. So here it is. It's in Proverbs 26, 18 to 19. It says, like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I am only joking. So that is that's a proverb, and what it's doing here is it's comparing the guy who, it says here, deceives his neighbor, basically does something deceptive to his neighbor, and then when the neighbor figures it out or whatever, he says, oh, I'm only joking, as if to excuse whatever rotten behavior, that he had just done to his neighbor. And so what the Bible's comparing him to is a madman who throws firebrands, like firebombing, arrows, like shooting someone, and death. And it's an interesting comparison, when you have someone who behaves this way. here's what the good book says, he's a comparison to. And I realize I'm talking about this kind of from a Christian perspective, because that's the other thing, when Jesus said to turn the other cheek, when there would be people who, like this, and it leveled some insults, turn the cheek. If someone is going to be that way, well, let him be that way. I don't know that you're supposed to just sit there and take it, but it's pretty clear you aren't supposed to treat the other person in kind. And it's so hard to do. And it's, I've learned as a Christian, it is extremely difficult to live up to all these principles in the Bible. And that's why I think it's so common so many times, when we call it the world, that's anybody that is outside of the church, basically. When they see our behavior and they recognize how unperfect it is, how hard it is to live up to these principles, whether it's turning the cheek or not behaving like this man deceiving his neighbor and says, I'm only joking. And there's a couple other, principles of scripture here that came to mind too, and I just kind of wrote them on a page I'm looking at here as I play it. This is in the New Testament in Ephesians 4, verse 29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Well, wow. So I could say on the one hand, well, the guy who said those comments to me is definitely not following this. He had corrupting talk come out of his mouth. But on the other hand, if I throw the same thing at him, choosing to take offense or choosing to react in such a way, I'll have to tighten this up so I can keep my GPS. And so if I choose to react that way, well, then I'm letting corrupting talk come out of my mouth. And as they always say, you don't want to stoop to their level. But why is it so tempting to want to, stoop to the other guy's level and hit him just as hard, and usually harder, than he just hit you? It is so tempting to do that. And then when you do, the problem is, from a Christian, is, the world will say, well, you're nothing but a hypocrite. And, that it many times, unfortunately, is very, very true, where, a Christian person hasn't lived up to the, let me change my, take my width down just a wee bit. Okay, how about this? Let me get up just a little bit. Is there a way to move that uphill? Offset, move, how do you course set, start? Let me see. No, now I'm off. There we go. There we go. That'll hopefully capture it all. So the way where to speak is to give grace to those that hear. So, if I apply that to myself now in this instance, looking back, I'm wondering how I should have better responded, instead of just asking dumb questions. See, that's the problem. Sometimes when you get caught flat-footed, if you will, It's like, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. I don't know what to say. It's better to say nothing at all. Anyway, it just kind of presents a conundrum. I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's another principle too. This one here, I think Jesus said in Matthew 12, verse 36, he says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Well, that's kind of a real sobering thought. I've wondered many times, what is a careless word? Is it an unnecessary word? Could it perchance be some middle-aged idiot playing a farming sim game and making a YouTube video with a whole bunch of words thrown in that maybe aren't heard by many, cared about by few? There's many things that could be said. What exactly is a careless word? And maybe the second part of the phrasing clarifies. It says, for by your words you will be justified, by your words you will be condemned. It's easy, like in this instance here, to point out the wrong done to me, maybe in this case here, in the form of words. It's easy for me to point that out, but maybe kind of like it's saying, if all I do is harp on the condemnation part, what justifies my words? If I get upset at this because it's something I have never done to someone, well, then maybe I have a leg to stand on. But truth be told, I've probably done this. Now, I hope it's less and less the older I get, and that some of the things I may have done as a kid, then maybe it's in the past, but I don't know. It's like I say, I'm just kind of thinking back through the event as it took place and just contemplating my actions, lack thereof, or the ones that I did take, the words that I said, the words I didn't say, the things that went through my mind. Well, you could have said this, these verbal takedowns, that could cause, hurt in someone. I don't know. I'm just trying to weigh it all in the balance, and I thought it would make for a topic that could be shared in here, at least. So, this doesn't even get to all of the particular Bible verses that, I thought of, with this here, but that's okay. The point has probably been made. So, what do you think? If you ever encountered someone like this, are you someone like this yourself? And if you are, what should have been said or done to prevent, or I don't know about prevent, or what should be done, in a situation like this? And what are your thoughts? Always interested to hear what people have to say as I continue working here on good old Gelvin Valley. I'm going to keep cultivating, and thank you so much for giving this a listen. I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.